Back to Hardball. A Pennsylvania judge today refused to block that strict new voter photo ID law that requires voters to show photo ID, official photo ID cards at the polls before voting this November. Opponents of the Republican-sponsored law charge that it disenfranchises voters who don't have the means to obtain valid photo ID cards, the poor, minorities, students, the elderly, and that is typically Democratic constituencies. With me right now, Pennsylvania, by the way, is a crucial swing state in this election. It could be a move that will have big impacts on this election day, and I'm worried it's going to turn the election. U.S. Congressman Chaka Fattah, a Democrat from Philadelphia, and Penn DeHare is co-director of the Advancement Project, a plaintiff in the suit that lost today. The group plans to appeal to the state Supreme Court tomorrow. Congressman Fattah, the case is dead right now. It looks like your voters and your constituency are going to have to go find God knows what evidence to prove they have a right to get either a birth certificate and then use the birth certificate to get a photo ID card from the government. What are you telling the average person who comes up to you and says, I live in your district, Congressman, I don't have a driver's license, how am I going to get to vote?
We're going to win this election because we're going to make sure they can vote. We're going to have a bifurcated strategy. Obviously, the appeal will go forward, and I want to thank the Advancement Project and the ACLU for their hard work on this, and I believe they'll be successful in a court of law. However, we've been putting together, over the last 4 months, the most significant effort. We have the list of people that the state says that are on the registration rolls, but who don't have a driver's license, and there's going to be a concerted effort. Now, if they don't have a birth certificate and they were born in Pennsylvania, then they need to meet all of the other requirements. They don't have to worry about the birth certificate. If they were born out of state, we're putting together linkages with elected officials in other states who can help facilitate us getting those birth certificates. Many of my constituents migrated from South Carolina, from other southern states. Those who are older may even be at a point in which there weren't recorded birth certificates for them, and we have to find other ways to meet this hurdle. But we're going to make sure that people have a right to vote. We want everyone who's registered to come cast a vote, and if there's any problem with their identification, they will be able to be allowed to file a provisional ballot. But there's no reason for this law. This is an attempt to, it's really a conspiracy to put aside the Republican Party's principles in lieu of trying to win this election. It's an embarrassment. It should be to the Republican Party, but we're not going to let it stand in the way of people exercising their franchise. And we're going to make sure that whatever the rules are, they're going to apply across the state. So we want to make sure that we can fight this in court, but we're going to meet the hurdles, whatever they may be. And, you know, people have given their lives and it went through a lot of effort and struggle. And, Chris, you know some of them firsthand so that people can have the right to vote. And we're not going to sit by and let these rights be set aside by some procedural hurdles.
Okay, let me go to Penn on this, because what strikes me, this is worse than anybody watching can understand. You have to have a birth certificate. To get a birth certificate, you need a photo ID. How are you going to get a government photo ID card if you need a birth certificate to get one? This is almost like the old literacy laws. Now, there are other ways perhaps to get there, but to the average person who doesn't have a driver's license, and big city people who live in row houses and rely on public transportation don't have driver's licenses. How do you get? Just tell me how difficult it is for an average person to get the vote in Pennsylvania where they grew up. How hard is it? Well, tell me how they have to do it, Penda.
Yes, Chris, this is a very disappointing decision. The evidence was overwhelming.
No, answer my question. What does it take? Tell us how bad this law is.
Yes.
What does it make a person do?
You have to have a photo ID that is not expired, that is issued by the state government or the United States military or a United States passport. And to get that ID, if you don't have a birth certificate, you have to go to the state where you were born, and that state has to give you a birth certificate. You have to pay whatever fee, which is, $14 to $25 to get a copy of your birth certificate. Then you bring that back to Pennsylvania. And we had many plaintiffs at trial who went to their states and they didn't have any record that they had been born there because they were born with a midwife and their birth wasn't registered. And so those folks are going to have an extremely hard time meeting the requirements of this law. And there's just not very much time left. So this is a real blow to democracy.
Chris, let me say this because, that the public says, well, voter ID, that's not too onerous. If this was just a matter of people producing some identification, that would be one thing. This is a very prescriptive requirement that requires, if you work for the school district in Lower Marion County, Township, in my new district, you won't be able to use that ID, even though it's a government-issued ID. But if you work for, you'd have to get one from the state of Pennsylvania. If you are a military person that has a, like Joe Sestak, who has a military card, but it doesn't have an expiration date, you won't be able to use that because it must have an expiration date. This is a very prescriptive law that a lot of people, when they show up at the polls, are never going to know these details. So we have to work very, very hard, and we have put together an effort to be able to knock on every one of these doors and to work to make sure that people can be educated while our great lawyers continue to fight this in the Supreme Court and, if necessary, in other courts.
Okay. You know, I think King Herod once did this about 2,000 years ago. Go back to the town of your birth. Remember that one? That's how the Christmas story occurred. This is really biblical stuff going on here. Really bad news. Anyway, thank you, U.S. Congressman Chaka Fattah. Good luck with this effort. Everybody should vote. And Pendeher, good luck in your case in the Supreme Court in Harrisburg.